In the summer of 79 AD, when Rome ruled continents and crushed nations with a single command, a secret unfolded beneath the Colosseum, one so disturbing that Rome's own historians hesitated to write it down. While 50,000 citizens cheered and laughed above ground, celebrating strength, victory, and blood, something far darker was happening in the damp maze below. A place built not for spectacle but for silence, for erasure. It was here, in the shadowed chambers beneath the arena floor, that captured women, princesses, priestesses, rebels, and daughters of fallen leaders, were marched in chains, not for execution, not for ransom, but for something the empire never recorded openly, something it buried under marble, law, and triumph. Most people today imagine gladiators as heroes, warriors bathed in glory and honor. But few know that after the crowds left, after the sand stopped shaking with applause, the victors were granted a reward that transformed men into instruments of Rome's deepest cruelty. A reward so normalized, so quietly institutionalized, that it became woven into the fabric of imperial control. This was not chaos, it was policy. Not passion, power. Not entertainment, a message to every conquered nation. Rome owns everything, your land, your leaders, even the people you love. And at the center of this hidden machinery stood one captured woman who refused to break, and one gladiator whose single act of defiance would shake the Senate itself. Because sometimes, history's darkest truths don't lie in what empires built, but in what they tried hardest to hide. Long before the Colosseum opened its gates to thunderous applause, Rome had already mastered the art of turning punishment into performance. But the cruelty that befell captive women wasn't born from chaos or impulsive violence. It was written into Rome's legal backbone, hidden inside the smallest lines of military doctrine and senatorial decrees. In the year 78 AD, during the suppression of a northern rebellion, the Roman Senate passed an amendment to an existing wartime statute. Most citizens never heard of it, and even most soldiers barely understood it. Officially, it was described as an extension of the spoils protocol. But among generals, it carried another name whispered behind tent flaps and in candle-lit war rooms. The Law of Pain. Its purpose was simple and chilling: to ensure that defeated nations never rose again. To Rome, conquering someone's land wasn't enough. You had to conquer their memory, their symbols, their spirit. And nothing symbolized rebellion more powerfully than the noble women of a fallen people, leaders, priestesses, wives of warriors, guardians of tradition. If they remained unbroken, their nations did too. And so the Law of Pain authorized something unprecedented. It allowed victorious commanders to determine the post-conquest handling of elite female captives without needing the Senate's approval. The wording was vague, deliberately so, and vague laws in Rome were sharpened by power into weapons. The intention was intimidation. The result became something far darker. By the time these captives reached Rome, they were no longer prisoners of war in the traditional sense. They were classified as instruments of deterrence, a phrase that looked harmless on parchment but carried a weight that would shape their fate the moment they entered the Colosseum complex. To the public, Rome preached civilization, order, and justice. But behind marble pillars and engraved legal codes, the state understood the psychological impact of humiliation far better than any barbarian tribe. You could execute a rebel and silence him once, but if you broke the women who represented his people, you silenced generations. That was the true purpose of the Law of Pain. Its influence reached every corner of Rome's vast machinery. From governors who feared rebellion to generals who wanted to prove their loyalty, to arena managers eager to increase spectacle. Even gladiators, men treated as property themselves, became unwilling participants in a system designed not for entertainment but for dominance. And so when women like Sabina, daughter of a mountain chieftain, were dragged into the hypogeum beneath the Colosseum, their fate didn't rest on the whims of the crowd. It was decided long before, inscribed in ink, sealed by powerful men who would never set foot in those tunnels. A law created to maintain order became the very tool that corrupted it, turning justice into intimidation, conquest into ritual, and human beings into warnings carved into the empire's memory. Rome believed this was strength, but it was here, in the spaces between law and cruelty, that the seeds of its darkest scandal were planted. Long before it became a whispered threat in military camps and a symbol of terror in conquered provinces, the hook was not a weapon at all. It was a tool, ordinary, functional, and overlooked. Archaeologists have found early versions in blacksmith workshops, in cargo warehouses, even hanging from the rafters of Roman stables. It was designed to pull crates, lift amphorae, drag heavy objects across stone floors. But when Rome set its sights on psychological warfare, ordinary tools became instruments of power. It started during the Dacian campaigns. Roman commanders found themselves overwhelmed not by the enemy's strength, but by something harder to break: their unity. Entire villages fought as one. Women carried water to the front lines. Priestesses rallied resistance. Matriarchs preserved stories of fallen warriors. Rome could slaughter thousands, and still the mountains would echo with rebellion the next season. And so a question emerged among the high command. How do you break a people who refuse to fear death? A Roman engineer whose name has been lost to history offered a chilling suggestion. Not a sword, not fire, not chains, but humiliation. A method not to kill, but to conquer the imagination of those who survived. He redesigned the simple warehouse hook into something ceremonial: polished bronze, etched markings, a curve precise enough to symbolize ownership, not brutality. It was never meant to shed blood, it was meant to send a message. The hook became a stage prop of authority, a symbol, an announcement. Where swords ruled the battlefield, the hook ruled the aftermath. Commanders used it to select captives deemed valuable for post-conquest processing. The moment the hook touched a prisoner's shoulder, her fate was sealed, not in pain but in certainty. It told everyone watching that she would not die quickly, nor be ransomed, nor returned home. She had been chosen for humiliation that served the empire, not justice. Rome, with its genius for presentation, wrapped cruelty in ceremony. Soon the hook was incorporated into triumphal parades, not used on captives physically, but carried by officers at the front of the procession, held upright like a banner. Its presence alone told the crowd what type of prisoners followed behind: leaders, noblewomen, symbols of resistance. In time, the hook became so feared that its mere appearance could quiet an entire village. Mothers hid their daughters. Leaders surrendered early. Tribes negotiated before battle even began. And yet, as powerful as the symbol was on the battlefield, it gained an even more sinister function once inside Rome's arenas. Arena officials discovered that the hook, when used ritualistically, heightened the sense of spectacle. It foreshadowed the fate of those the audience never saw again. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a torture device. It was something far more terrible. A promise. A promise that Rome would decide how a conquered life ended, or how it continued. History books rarely mention her name, but the first recorded victim of Rome's hook ritual was a woman the empire feared long before it captured her. Her name was Ilaria of the Red Hills, a chieftain's daughter, a battlefield messenger, and the voice behind a rebellion that nearly cost Rome an entire province. Ilaria was captured during the winter offensive of 73 AD, when snowstorms slowed her people's retreat and Roman scouts intercepted her group in the valley. She didn't fight when they surrounded her. She didn't beg or bargain. Instead, she stared at the commander with a defiance so unshakable that even hardened legionaries later wrote about it. That defiance is what sealed her fate. Rome wanted a message. They chose her to deliver it. Ilaria was transported to the provincial capital, not in chains like most captives, but on a procession platform as if she were a prize. Citizens lined the streets. Some watched in silence. Others cheered. Everyone understood what it meant when a woman of status was captured alive. But no one understood what was about to happen. The governor presiding over the region, Gaius Petronius Varro, ambitious, ruthless, and eager to impress the Senate, wanted more than a simple execution. He wanted a demonstration of absolute Roman authority, a spectacle that would echo across villages for miles, something unforgettable enough to choke rebellion before it started again. And so he ordered the hook ritual to be performed publicly for the first time. The forum where merchants usually sold grain and olives was cleared. Soldiers erected a small wooden stage. On a table nearby lay the polished ceremonial hook, bronze, engraved, gleaming beneath the winter sun. Not a tool of violence, but a symbol twisted into something far darker. Ilaria was brought out wearing the red cloak of her people. Varro allowed it intentionally. Contrast made the message stronger. Crowds gathered. The air was thin with cold but heavy with unease. When Varro stepped forward, he didn't speak to Ilaria. He spoke past her, projecting his voice toward the families, rebels, and village leaders forced to attend. Rome does not fear death, he declared. Rome owns it. Then he lifted the hook. What followed was not the gruesome display some expected. Rome didn't need horror to dominate, only humiliation. Ilaria was sentenced not to immediate death, but to a fate much more calculated. She was marked by the hook and placed into a category Roman law called captiva exemplaris, a prisoner whose treatment served as a model of punishment. Her execution came after 3 days of forced display. She was paraded through villages that once cheered her, forced to stand as a living symbol of defeat. Families who revered her were ordered to watch in silence. Children who once followed her now hid behind their mothers. When the sentence was finally carried out, it happened quietly, almost coldly. No spectacle, no roar of an arena, just a simple execution by military decree witnessed only by Roman officials. Varro didn't seek gore, he sought erasure. But it backfired. Instead of quelling rebellion, Ilaria's death ignited it. Her people carved the hook symbol into stones as a mark of resistance. Songs were written in secret. Her story spread across tribes with greater power than Rome had anticipated. Rome expected fear. What it created instead was memory. By the year 76 AD, the hook ritual had spread beyond the northern provinces, whispered from governor to governor as a tool of discipline. It had not yet reached the heart of the empire, but that would soon change, carried by a woman Rome never intended to break. Her name was Queen Aeliana of the Grey Isles, widow of King Brannick, and the last sovereign leader in her region who dared refuse a Roman treaty. Unlike most monarchs Rome confronted, Aeliana did not raise an army or flee into exile. She simply sent a message to the proconsul stationed near her borders. No empire owns the sea. No empire owns my people. Rome took this personally. The Senate ordered a punitive campaign. Aeliana was captured after a brief siege, escorted not by rough legionaries but by decorated officers, as if she were a dangerous treasure. She was brought to the provincial capital under heavy guard, not because she posed a threat physically, but because she carried something Rome feared far more: influence. Aeliana was wise, revered, and unshakably calm. Even in chains, she walked with the poise of a queen. Citizens whispered as she passed. Some bowed their heads. Others looked away, ashamed. Rome had conquered her body, but not the dignity around her like a cloak. Proconsul Lucius Cassius Attalus, young, brilliant, and desperate to make a name for himself, saw this immediately. Aeliana's capture was his chance to climb the imperial ladder, but he also recognized a dangerous truth. If she died as a queen, her people would remember her forever. If she lived humiliated, they would never recover. And so Attalus ordered something unprecedented. He decreed that Queen Aeliana would witness the next hook ritual, not as a spectator of power, but as a victim in waiting. The message was simple: when your people see you broken, they will break too. But Aeliana did not crumble. On the day of the ritual, she was brought to the old amphitheater overlooking the sea, a weathered stone arena where local disputes had once been settled publicly. Soldiers lined the perimeter. Villagers were forced to attend, though many hid tears behind stiff expressions. The prisoner chosen for the ritual was Loriska, a young leader from Aeliana's allied tribes, captured 2 weeks earlier. She had grown up under Aeliana's protection, trained by her, guided by her. Rome knew this. That was the point. When Aeliana saw the ceremonial hook lifted toward Loriska, her face did not change. She did not cry out or falter. Instead, she stepped forward, her chains clinking softly, and addressed the crowd, not the Romans. "Remember this moment," she said, her voice steady, ringing across the stone. "Not for fear, for truth." Attalus froze. The soldiers hesitated. Even the villagers turned sharply toward her. "This empire fears unity," Aeliana continued. "It fears our voices more than our weapons." Her words struck the crowd like a spark landing in dry grass. Attalus panicked. He ordered the ritual to proceed more quickly, hoping to drown her voice with ceremony and silence. But it was too late. Everyone in that arena had seen something Rome never accounted for: a queen refusing to witness hell, and instead forcing Rome to witness her. Attalus later reported that the ritual succeeded as intended, but private letters discovered centuries later tell the truth. That day, the villagers began carving Aeliana's words into driftwood, into stones, into the walls of their homes. Rome had tried to shame her. Instead, they immortalized her. By the time word of Queen Aeliana's defiance reached the northern provinces, Rome had already begun tightening its grip on the border territories. Governors doubled patrols. Arena managers expanded underground chambers. The hook ritual, once obscure, was now whispered in marketplaces and sung in mournful chants along river crossings. But nowhere did the story ignite more fury than in the fortified town of Münster, a place Rome considered subdued, loyal, and firmly under imperial control. It was a mistake. Münster was not loyal. It was quiet, and Rome had never learned to distinguish the two. The spark came from a single wooden tablet. A trader from the Grey Isles carried it across mountains and rivers, wrapped in cloth to hide its significance. On its surface, carved with a sailor's knife, were Queen Aeliana's words: "This empire fears unity." He handed it to a local blacksmith, who copied it onto iron scraps and passed them to townspeople under the cover of night. By spring, nearly every household in Munster possessed a version of the message. Rome thought it had terrified the region into obedience. Instead, it had united them. The turning point came when the governor, Marcus Falcinius Regulus, received orders from Rome to perform a grand hook ritual during the festival season. The Senate believed a public display would reinforce imperial dominance. Regulus, eager for favor, planned the largest ceremony the province had ever seen. He selected a prisoner named Ardalin, a healer from the mountain tribes and rumored confidant of Queen Aeliana. She had been captured 6 months earlier while tending wounded rebels. Rome hoped her humiliation would echo through every settlement. Instead, it reached Munster and sparked an explosion. When news arrived that Ardalin would be paraded through the province before the ceremony, Munster elders gathered in a hidden wine cellar beneath an abandoned granary. Among them was Tomarin, a quiet cartographer whose maps Rome often purchased, never suspecting he traced more than roads. Beside him stood Etta, a midwife who had delivered half the town and memorized every Roman patrol route in the process. They made a choice no provincial town had dared before. They would not wait for Rome to break another woman. They would rise first. The plan was simple but dangerous. As Ardalin's procession passed near Munster, locals would disrupt the escort, smuggle her into the forest, and send her eastward to safety. It was meant to be quick, precise, quiet. It was none of those things. When the procession arrived at the town's edge, dozens of Munster citizens stepped forward, not with weapons but with silence. They blocked the road, stood shoulder to shoulder, and stared at the Roman soldiers in a wall of unblinking defiance. Soldiers shouted. Villagers stayed still. Children clutched their parents' hands. Elders lifted their chins. It lasted less than 5 minutes. But 5 minutes was enough. Ardalin disappeared from the procession, hidden among the crowd and spirited into the dense forest before the Romans realized what had happened. By nightfall, she was gone, along with Munster's illusion of obedience. Rome responded exactly as the townspeople expected, swiftly, harshly, and with overwhelming force. But the damage was done. For the first time, a town had successfully defied the hook ritual. For the first time, Rome's message had been reversed. Munster wasn't rebelling because it was strong. It rebelled because Rome had shown the world how cruelty could unify the conquered more powerfully than any treaty. By the winter of 79 AD, the hook ritual was collapsing under the weight of its own infamy. It had begun as a quiet form of intimidation, practiced in remote provinces, hidden behind stone walls and military ceremony. But stories travel faster than soldiers, and whispers are harder to silence than rebellions. From the Grey Isles to the Red Hills, from mountain villages to sea-edge hamlets, people repeated the same names. Ilaria, Loriska, Ardalin. And over them all, the words of Queen Aeliana, carved into driftwood, etched into bronze scraps, whispered in children's games. Rome had intended to break them. Instead, Rome had made them legend. When the Senate realized the ritual's political cost, it panicked. Governors disagreed. Generals argued. Arena officials protested losing their most effective intimidation tool. But the real breaking point came not from distant rebellions, but from within Rome itself. The final victim in the story of the hook ritual was not a rebel princess, a defiant queen, or a mountain healer. It was a single young woman whose name history nearly forgot. Sabina of the Dion Hills. She was brought to Rome with the last convoy of northern captives, quiet, exhausted, but unyielding. She did not fight the guards or speak to the overseers. She carried herself with a stillness that unsettled even hardened soldiers. What no one realized was that Sabina's quiet would change the empire more than any rebellion. When she arrived at the Colosseum Hypogeum, the arena officials prepared another ritual, not large, not theatrical, but symbolic, a demonstration for noble spectators, a reminder of Rome's iron hand. But the day Sabina was selected, something unprecedented happened. The gladiator assigned to her, Gaius Valerius Maximus, decorated fighter, survivor of dozens of matches, looked into her eyes and saw something he had not seen in years. Someone who understood captivity as deeply as he did. According to a fragment of a clerk's report, Maximus hesitated. He asked Sabina her name. She told him. He asked if she feared death. She said no. He asked what she feared instead. Oblivion, she whispered, not being remembered. In that moment, something shifted. A gladiator, a man Rome owned, made a choice Rome did not expect. He refused the ritual. He claimed Sabina was unfit, invoked a medical exemption, and stepped back. Not courageously, not dramatically, just quietly, firmly, as if reclaiming a piece of the humanity the arena had carved out of him. Guards objected. The overseer protested. But the rules were the rules. If a gladiator rejected an allocation on medical grounds, bureaucracy forced acceptance. Sabina was taken to the medical cells. Maximus returned to the sands. But rumors spread instantly. A gladiator had refused. A captive had been spared. The hook ritual had been interrupted by compassion. For an empire built on spectacle, this was scandal. Within days, the Senate convened. Governors argued the ritual created martyrs. Generals complained that rebellions were growing, not shrinking. Philosophers declared the practice a stain on Roman honor. Even some patrician women whispered that Rome had crossed a line no empire should cross. 2 weeks later, the Senate passed the Lex Captivaria, banning the ritual permanently from public practice. The hook was removed from arenas. Arena managers destroyed records. Governors rewrote reports. Rome tried to bury the story as deeply as possible. But something remained. Sabina died quietly days later, sickness, neglect, exhaustion. But her final wish was fulfilled. She was remembered, not because she survived, but because her refusal to break inspired someone trapped in the same machinery of cruelty. Her name, recorded on a bronze tag later discovered in excavations, became the final echo of a ritual the empire wanted to erase. Sabina was not Rome's victim. She was Rome's turning point. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, the Colosseum crumbled, the hook ritual faded into rumor. A ghost story scholars debated but rarely proved. Most believed it had never existed at all, a myth twisted by rebel memories and political enemies. Rome, after all, recorded only the victories it wanted the world to remember. But history has a habit of resurfacing, often in the unlikeliest places. In 1894, the Museum of Roman Antiquities in Florence received a shipment of artifacts from a private collector in the countryside. The crates were unremarkable: broken pottery, rusted nails, fragments of amphorae. But deep inside one crate lay something extraordinary. A small bronze tag, oval-shaped, coated in soil. On its surface, faint Latin engraving: Sabina Captiva, 79 AD. The tag should never have existed. Roman administrators rarely marked female prisoners individually, and never prisoners tied to rituals the empire tried to suppress. The museum curator, Dr. Emilia Vescari, knew instantly that this was no ordinary artifact. But within hours of cataloging the tag, strange things began to happen. A formal request arrived from a wealthy patron demanding its immediate transfer for private study. A second request came from an unnamed foundation in Rome. A third arrived from a collector with no registered address. Within a week, 3 different groups wanted the tag, and none provided a reason. Dr. Vescari refused. She locked the tag in a secure glass case in the restricted archives. But she underestimated the lengths some would go to bury or claim a piece of history others wanted forgotten. On the night of January 12th, during a heavy winter storm, the museum's alarm system failed. Guards reported a brief outage. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing missing. Except the bronze tag. But the thieves made a mistake. They left behind the crate the tag had arrived in. And inside it, unnoticed at first, were 2 more artifacts hidden in straw padding. A short bronze rod curved at one end, and the faint outline of ceremonial markings. A fragment of the hook. The discovery sent shockwaves through the academic world. Overnight, the hook ritual shifted from speculation to confirmed history. Scholars descended on Florence. Articles flooded journals. Theories erupted about who stole the tag and why. Some claimed a private collector wanted to hide Rome's darker past. Others believed the thieves were descendants of families linked to the ritual. A few whispered a more unsettling theory. That someone within Rome itself, an institution, a society, a guardian of imperial legacy, still wanted certain stories buried. Dr. Vescari never found the thieves, but she did something the ritual's victims had never received in their own time. She published everything. Every mark on the hook fragment, every engraving on the crate, every detail of Sabina's tag. She forced the world to remember. Because history is more than ruins and relics. It is the pieces of truth powerful men tried to silence, and the voices of those who refused to disappear. For centuries, the Colosseum has stood as a monument to Roman engineering, arches of marble, corridors of stone, a marvel of symmetry and strength. Tourists walk its tunnels imagining battles, cheering crowds, clashing steel. But beneath those same stones lived stories far less heroic, carved not in marble but in shadows. The hook ritual was never meant to survive. Rome buried it beneath laws, ceremonies, and silence. It erased records, destroyed tablets, punished those who questioned it. Yet even the most powerful empire cannot silence memory forever. It lived in whispered songs, in driftwood carvings, in bronze tags smuggled across centuries, in the courage of women whose names history refused to carry, until now. What happened to Sabina, Aeliana, Ilaria, Loriska, Ardalin, and countless others was not an accident of cruelty. It was a system built on the belief that power required humiliation, that fear ensured peace, that dominance justified everything. But Rome misunderstood something fundamental. Cruelty does not control people. It unites them. Aeliana's words traveled farther than any Roman decree. Sabina's quiet defiance ended a ritual no army could stop. Munster's stand proved that silence can be more powerful than swords, and the stolen museum tag reminded the modern world that truth, once uncovered, refuses to be caged again. History is not just a record of what happened. It is a mirror reflecting who we choose to be. When we admire Rome's grandeur, we must also acknowledge the shadows cast by its monuments, because the measure of a civilization is not found in its architecture or armies, but in how it treats those with no voice, no shield, no power. Rome built wonders. Rome built horrors. And the ruins of both still stand. The question is not what the empire did, but what we choose to remember.